You would be surprised how many hidden things reveal themselves in the dark. I like to take long walks at night and think of scary and interesting stories. There's a story just down the road I'd like to tell you about. Walk with me. Some say a picture can reveal 1,000 words, but in this next tale, it may just hold 1,000 nightmares.
I've always loved photography. Something about capturing and developing stills makes me feel like I'm holding life frozen in time. Cameras have always been my strong suit. Even as a kid, I was glued to anything that would project an image. And my wife, Jane, knows this. So when she was vacationing in Japan and stumbled into a small village, the camera, as she puts it, found her. It was being sold in a shop window for a handful of yen. She took one look at the vintage artwork and knew she had found me the perfect souvenir. She was thoughtful like that. Although the gesture was pure and innocent, something lingered within the device's mechanisms, waiting for a right moment to present itself. I graciously accepted the gift, almost as a new challenge, then proceeded to do what any respected artist does. I put it on a shelf and forgot all about it for months. When I stumbled upon it again, something felt different. It felt as if it had doubled in weight. And suddenly, that spark I felt when I first held the camera came rushing back. Only this time, I felt compelled to get it working. I noticed things started to slide when my nights became longer and less productive. All my attention had fixated on locating and obtaining the film for this camera. Jane became less enthused with my research and more concerned as time went on. Weeks turned into months as I haggled and chased down any leads, and my sleep became less and less the closer I got. Finally, I got a line from a man in Tokyo. I found him in a chat room for high-end filmmakers and photographers buying and trading antique products. It took a while to figure out the language barrier, but thanks to a translation site and a banking app, we made quick transactions in the matter. 8 business days later, the film was sprawled over my kitchen table, and a satisfied smile was firmly planted on my face. That night in my study, I carefully laid out all the pieces of the camera and began its construction. After a few minutes, I delightfully raised the viewfinder to my eye and gently pressed the shutter. Nothing. I checked my settings and film installation. Nothing's out of place. Then I go to snap another one. Yet, nothing. I sit back and stare at the camera in disappointment for a while, racking my brain about where I could have gone wrong. Then it hit me. The release, a shuttle release, was the only other part that I hadn't used. I set the camera up on the tripod, pulled out my backdrop, and just like a Vegas tycoon sacking a rival's casino, punched that trigger. Nothing. Defeated, emotional, and exhausted, I decided to cut my losses, or at least until the morning. Leaving the camera on the tripod, I shut off all electronics and called it a night. Upon my exit, I could have sworn I saw the camera's flash snap, but at the time, I just shook it off to blaming my lack of sleep. The next morning, I woke to find the camera had toppled onto the floor. Luckily, undamaged. Upon inspection, the only thing that was out of place was the shutter seemed to have been loosened. And, much to my satisfaction, now the camera worked. Filled with inspiration, I set out to put my new toy to the test. Within a few hours, I had filled my first roll. Rushing to the darkroom, I barely got the lights off before I cracked open the camera, too excited to follow my usual development steps. Luckily, soon I was able to see images take form in the dish. The photographs were some of my best work, so good in fact, that for the first time, in a long time, I finally liked my work. After I developed the pictures, I started to see what looked like small aberrations, at first appearing like lens flares, but on closer examination, it looked like a man, hung by the neck, from one of the trees at Bradbury Park. The photo shook me to say the least, and I immediately launched into a detailed investigation of the other prints. A few more photos later, another abnormality near Jefferson Bridge. Another flare, another gruesome scene. This time, a woman plummeting to her demise. I shuffled through the rest of them, finding more disturbing anomalies, with more gruesome deaths, but none more chilling than the final frame. Everything was dark in the final print, and all I could make out was a pale woman grinning at me. In my terror, I realized this was the photo that was snapped the night before, leaving no doubt in my mind of its origin. Horrified, I left the darkroom and walked my neighborhood till dawn, just trying to forget. Reeling from my discovery, I was unable to return to the darkroom for days. The haunting images had burned themselves into my subconscious. But the following week, I finally worked up the nerve and returned to my darkroom. There, I found the photos still hanging from their respective clothespins. I flipped the main light, took a deep breath, and pulled the photos down one by one. My cross-examination only provided bewilderment, and to my shock, all representations of gruesome deaths had been wiped clean from the images. It was now a normal photograph of simple landscapes. At first, I thought I must be losing my head. The lack of sleep must have taken a toll, and now I was hallucinating. I don't know if it was out of fear or out of precaution. Some would argue they're the same. But for whatever reason, I cleaned up the darkroom, reset everything, and placed the camera once again on the shelf. Out of sight, out of mind. I had almost completely forgotten about the camera until Jane needed a portrait for a new business venture. Out of love, she suggested that I take it with a vintage camera. For artistic effect, as she said with a smile and a wink. Apprehensive of the request, seeing as I never told her about the photos, partly because I had no proof, and partly for the fear of being committed, I began reasoning with myself. Nothing is wrong with the camera. It's all in your head. As I made my way to the darkroom and picked up the camera off the shelf, she prepared for her close-up. I then loaded the camera with a new film roll. Maybe it was a bad film roll, I would tell myself, hoping nothing would happen to my beloved wife. She posed and I readied the camera. A chill ran down my spine. Not enough to deter me from my work, but enough to note it. I remember how radiant she looked, so full of life. Suddenly, all my fear washed away. I told her to say cheese in an attempt to capture a candid moment. As she giggled, I snapped the photo. Something happened right after the shutter snapped. Everything became silent aside from a ringing hum, and the whole room fell dark. I lifted my head from behind the camera to rest my eyes on where Jane had sat moments before. Only she was no longer there. In her place was a strange galactic terror, as if from another world. I called out with a chuckle and slight humility, as if I was the butt of some extremely elaborate joke, but was met with no response. Just the twinkling sounds and a cosmic gash in place of my wife. Seconds later, the room filled with its natural life once more, and the terror disappeared. I cried out for my wife, but again was met with nothing. Panic set in. You're having a meltdown. This isn't real life. Who will believe me? I don't even have any evidence. I don't have an alibi. Once I had finished my tantrum, I rushed into the darkroom and pulled the camera apart to develop the film. What I thought was one photo turned out that the whole roll had been filled, and every frame had an image. In horror, I watched as one by one the images began to reveal a slow-motion movie of my wife disintegrating into the camera. My heart split. In the days that followed, I barely slept or ate. My whole focus became getting her back. I researched everything I could about the camera, its origins, and what gave it its power. I had so many questions and next to nothing to go on. I have now exhausted all options to no avail. The man who sold me the film has vanished, leaving me with very few clues. I'm recording this because I know what I have to do now. I've wasted enough time. I found out as much as I possibly could, but I can no longer wait around and let her slip away. I have to pursue her. So, if you're listening to this and you're looking for answers, all I can say is, the camera's in the living room.